Hello, Brown University community. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and I wanted to start our conversation today by acknowledging an extraordinary human being who has been a part of the Brown community for a long time. His name is Anani Gigiano, and he died a couple of days ago. And he was, I would say, one of the people most responsible for the trajectory of my life. I met him at Brown University, and I took his Afro-Brazilian history class that was about the African diaspora, but it was him as a human, the way he was as a human, how much he laughed, and how absurd he found the horrible injustice of this planet. Sort of the joy he brought to his outrage and his teaching was really inspiring to me. And so this conversation is going to be about fact and fiction and death and life and all kinds of things. But Mary Ellen and I just discovered before we started this that we both knew and loved Anani. I don't like saying knew. I like saying I know Anani, and I'm going to know him forever. So Mary Ellen, you know Anani too.
Hi everybody at Brown and the greater universe on the internets. My name is Mary Ellen Carroll. I'm in New York City right now, in Chelsea. I'm a conceptual artist, and I too knew Anani and his wife and his family from living down the hall from one another. And you know, as was stated, his humanity, his consideration, tricksterism, ability to like truly engage and understand things, both in a historical sense, but in the present, were, you know, there's very few people that are like that and that you connect with, you know, certainly, you know, in a large building in New York City, but as a neighbor and friend. And yeah, it's a giant loss. But his legacy, you know, of course, continues. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that we'll talk about is the stewardship of, you know, our lives, the people that we care about's lives, and what gets produced, and how that, you know, the temporariness of that, you know, as a consideration of temporality in all of our works, right? Of, you know, both with, you know, the Michelle and Kirsten in terms of how we use time and other narrative devices that are going to be looked at thoroughly. Since we don't have a moderator, what I did say is that we have a little bowl of moderators that, you know, if it gets slowed down a little bit, we can select them now, who we would each represent going forward. But I think, you know, we have a lot to say to one another. So, so thank you for this invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And Michelle, just to say, you know, you didn't know Anani,
Yeah.
right? So you don't know this glorious person, but you know, when I got the call from another beloved Brown classmate, James Foreman, saying Anani has died, obviously my first response was no. Like, this cannot be. I cannot accept this, right? And obviously, you know, I made this film called Dick Johnson is Dead, about like refusing to accept death. And Michelle, you know, your work seems to be, from what I've encountered so far, both thrilling, but also sort of hilarious about the idea of loss and sort of the absurdity of loss. So I'm really excited to hear you talk about why you are bringing humor to loss, because I you know, I'm still trying to understand what I'm up to with that.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that I didn't know Anani, and I look forward to knowing him now. And some of my best relationships have been with people that aren't on the planet anymore. So it's like not a deal breaker for me. And I like
that is so true.
The potential of still knowing this human that you both speak so fondly of. It's an interesting thing with regard with humor, because I don't actually understand humor at all. Like Mary Ellen, I have serious objections to metaphor, and I would even say I have objections to one of its cousins, which I think is humor, because I just don't understand it. And so what I would say is that I'm so pleased that you found the work to be funny, but whenever I make a work, I never think it's funny. And so the first time I show a work and I hear other people laughing, I think, huh, really? Because my dad's fucking dying. And this was like the most, it was like a desperate longing, a quest for replacement objects and preparation for something I categorically resist. And so, but this has consistently happened to me, is that people would describe the work as funny. And I just think, wow, that's an unexpected byproduct, which I never complain about. One time I tried to say something funny in a piece, and I said something like, his rod and his staff, they comfort me. That was the only time I've ever intentionally, and I don't even think that's that funny, but that was the only time I can think of where I was like, trying to be funny. Otherwise, I think I'm telling the truth, and I think that might be super funny, maybe.
But that's the whole point. I mean, that's been saying against metaphor, is that if people suspend disbelief about things, right? I mean, look at the current situation that we're living in right now, and it's not like this is something new, right? I mean, we've had it for millennia, but it's, I think the way that people communicate, and, if you stage something, or if it's happening in reality, it just smells different, right? It's a different vibration. It's a different thing that's being done between the construct. And so I think that, the one thing in both of your work, right, of dealing with death, and also, the series that I started in the 80s called My Death is Pending, because when I couldn't even be more alive at that point, and then the irony of what happened to me, 3 years ago, of then having this, not a near-death experience, as my doctor said, but truly dying 9 times. So I think that, what do you do with that? And when you have no memory of any of those things, right? So within your work, well, of course, if you're me, then you finish that, almost 30-year series by doing the documentary and entering into the night of destruction in front of 15,000 people at Irwindale Speedway. But, in regards to both of that, I've look at your experience of your father and his Alzheimer's, and being present, but then not being, and having witnessed your mother. And what did you do? I mean, that footage that you had of her going down the stairs, and then this additional collection of these things that get lost or forgotten, and then how do they get picked up again, right? Of those icons, like, I mean, the toilet, there's some other ones, of course, that were hilarious, and you are funny. I mean, it's best not to laugh at one's own jokes, right? Really a sign of being an amateur. But I think that also there's a kind of, there's a real humanity in the work that doesn't just scream out, okay, this is what I'm doing, right? It's like you're working within the mediums, right, that we choose, to really be vigilant about pushing those further, which I think has to be done. I think, I mean, you can develop a signature style, which, then you do over and over again. The market, right, if we're talking about, we can get into a little bit of discussion about capitalism, but I think that creating that and how you can expand it, not only for yourself, right? So you don't get fucking bored out of your mind with the work that you're doing, both creatively and intellectually, but then also for who's looking at your work, right?
Right.
And without that kind of self-consciousness, which I think that, you know, if it's a failure, who cares? Like at least the thing is put into the world. And I think, you know, like how, like look at using your father, you know, to, you know, enact his own deaths over and over and over again. You know, so
Right.
much of this, right?
It's conceived as failure, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
because the idea is like, I want to use this movie to keep my father alive forever. Like that's what I'm trying to do. Or I want to use this movie to keep the dementia from pulling him apart. We want to like Frankenstein him back together. But the thing, you know, that you're saying, Michelle, about being desperate, like absolutely I was desperate. And I feel like that's the thing with artwork in general, that it takes a while to figure out, like when you do it from the place of your own need,
Yeah.
like from your deepest need, then it emerges as something both unfamiliar to you and interesting to you, right? Because it's just like, wow, what is this thing, right? But I mean, I loved what you said about Anani, Michelle, that like his death is no impediment to knowing him.
Yeah.
And I think about that like in relation to art in general, and why one wants to become an artist is in some ways that you have known people who are unknowable, who are already dead through their work, and somehow they did this thing that helps you see the world in a new way, or helps you survive, and it's sort of like it's that reaching across time and space to the aliveness that's in things. And so I'm curious, Michelle, like with your work, was your father already dead when you started the work of the the obsolescence of the man? Was he already dead, or was he dying when you began?
He had been diagnosed with cancer, but he was going to live 5 more years. And I didn't know that I was desperate at the time. It's only in retrospect that I see it, because I'm trying not to go, this work has got to function psychologically. I wasn't working the system trying to.
Oh, you are such a mastermind. Do not fool us. Like, both you're hilarious and you're a mastermind, but okay.
It would have been more efficient.
You were totally evil geniusing it.
Maybe so. But I thought I was making a piece about biodiversity and the politics of an archive, and I thought there were these other things that I was doing. But then when I started creating, so I really wasn't thinking so much about my dad at the time at all. But then when I said to my father, hey, I'm making this piece and I'm collecting man hands. Can I make a mold of your hand? And I made the mold, and it came out in positive, and I held it and I said, oh, it would have just been a lot easier if I had just done that and not made a piece at all, because that's what I wanted, that moment of, you know. And so he wasn't central to the effort. But then I continued to make content for the work, because I don't understand closure. And so making like these websites that are kind of improvisational performance scores, I can perpetually add content. And when I show them, I try not to say perform them, because I don't know much about that also, even though
Good choice.
Yeah, can't do that. So I always am trying to make new content. So you know, I'm like, if I have a gig, I'll like reread some Descartes and then understand the piece for, you know what I mean? So it's always, I don't want to know it, but I've always, I've kept making more content. And in the last 4 months, I've made a bunch of super dad-centric content, which I didn't see coming in. Whether I uploaded or not, I'm not so sure, but he wasn't central. But I think the thing to bridge your question with something that Mary Ellen said about like the suspension of disbelief is that I feel that that I'm incapable of it. and so the thing has to really happen in real time. Otherwise I don't know what it means. And I think that that's when maybe I'll turn back to you both about this fact that I had such a kinesthetic reaction to seeing and reading about your works of that there was no denying in this question of fiction and nonfiction of the physical impact on the body of what was happening, that there was no, there is like, sure, we have deep fake and we can like in post and like, I get the editing trick of like the body double, but the physicality and the physical impact of the labor of making the thing, the presence of the labor, I was like, that struck me almost as more of a through line, if I might be as presumptuous to suggest there is one, that it isn't just the dad thing, but that this kind of commitment to labor and to, even in a fictional context, there's the nonfiction of the physical act. And, you know, I'm a dancer, so I'm centralizing the experience of the body, but watching Mary Ellen, you in the car being hit, and even all of that's what I was going to ask about the inability for the body to be fictionalized.
Ooh, that's so good.
That is good.
The body can't be fictionalized.
Well, I think part of that is that there's a simultaneity to what's going on, right? Because there's the reality of the making, right? That requires the sort of physical being and presence. And then there's the construct of that media, or whatever that piece is going to be ultimately, right? So that sort of simultaneity of those two things that are being done. And if you're doing something in the making of, right, so choreography being watched and made, right, rehearsed and then enacted, and then with an audience, or making a film even, right, between the process of the crew and everybody there who's also an audience member at that point, because it's documentary, but then you're staging these, you know, sort of slapstick, almost absurd setups that will take place with everybody. And so they're acting, they're in it in reality, right? Where you have to process between, you know, the loss of someone, be it because of, you know, Alzheimer's or the actual death, and with, you know, witnessing that is, yeah, how we construct these processes so that we can do it, right? So we can be making and be in it and observe it as well simultaneously. You know, I always go back to this one thing of Cage that he wrote about Terry Riley's In Sea, and how it's such a like the perfect piece of art because, you know, there's a composition, right? There's notation that's done, but once you put it into the hands of the performers, they go in and out as long as they do it on a C note. And so, and there's no duration to it, right? Like I could play for like a year if I wanted to in that piece and it would still continue. And so it's always the same, but it's always different. And I always think like, how do we do that? Because that's how we are as individuals, right? Essentially. And I think, you know, the other thing is like how, like the beauty of the work of art is that it only has to be itself. It does not have to be or do anything else. And, you know, we can go deeply into, you know, the philosophical underpinnings of that, you know, of course, with Nietzsche, but I think it's, you know, that's why we do what we do. I mean, that's why I do it. It's like, because what, you know, there's nothing like that. And there's nothing like that process either.
I got to film with Terry Riley working on Sam Green's piece with the Kronos Quartet, A Thousand Thoughts. And we went and we filmed with him at his home and we got to talking about death. And he's like, I know where I want to die. And And we said, well, where is it? And he says, it's right here. Like, I just come right down here. You can see where I'm going to die. And I went down the hill with him and we lay down on this beautiful like lawn looking up at the trees. And he's like, don't you want to die? And it's like sunny. And he's like, we're being held by the earth. Like, don't you just want to die? And I was like, I do want to die. But Terry said this thing that really blew my mind and has been incredibly useful to me. He basically sort of described one of his early pieces that he had written. And, he'd been really constricted and trying really hard to do all these very difficult things in the piece, and really felt like, he'd made something, and then went to the performance of it. And, one of the musicians made a mistake. People were coughing in the audience. There was the sound of traffic outside. And all of a sudden he said, and I can't remember his exact terminology, but it's like pretty fabulous. So he was like the great sonic. He's like, suddenly I realized my work is just a part of the great sonic. And I'm not like, I can't control my relationship to sound. And I don't have to worry about failing anymore because I don't have to worry about controlling anymore. And that was such a, for me, like with this film, just felt like I already knew that I can't control dementia because I'd been through it with my mom. I already knew that I can't control death because I'd been through it with my mom. But like you were saying earlier, Michelle, I was a little like outraged and I wanted to resist it. I was defiant. And so I started thinking about what Terry had said and sort of like the like, oh, how do you flip things? How do you like, say like, oh yeah, I'd love to die right now. I'd love to die right here. And so one of the things that I've done with this process of this film, so it's like, it's not a completed film for me, Mary Ellen, like the film is ongoing, right? And even in the title, I've said Dick Johnson is dead, but he's not dead yet, right? And he will never die. I ask everyone, and this is when I, pitch the film to Netflix, like talk to all of the crew members. Like the idea is like, how do I initiate it back and forth? So one of the questions that I've asked everyone who has encountered this film when I get a chance to talk with them is, have you thought about how you wish to die? And it's really fun to ask you, Mary Ellen, because like you've already died 9 times. So like, have you thought about how you wish to die?
I have a lot. Because my mother just died. And so we had many conversations about what she wanted and how it would be done. And it was exactly the way that she would be at home and, taken care of if possible. And that was done. But no, for myself, and I never talk about this publicly, but I'll just share this, to wake up in February of 2017 with a beautiful view of New York Presbyterian. They have unbelievable art on the cardiac ICU, and find out that I, had this experience of collapsing at a friend's 60th birthday at the townhouse, the gay club where older men procure younger, as they say, but having been there a number of times, and for this birthday, and collapsing under the piano. And then a month later, coming to, overlooking the East River in New York Presbyterian and understanding this. So first of all, I make a really shitty dead person. There's no lights, there's no voices, there's no...
Seeing your life play a flash before you,
there's just nothing. You wake up, but you don't remember that Donald Trump was elected. So then your friends keep you, because you're a political junkie and very engaged in all of that, try to keep you off of like the news media. But how do I want to go? I want to go, exactly, the other question that has come up, and for both of you, of like seeing, your parents go through this, and has it made you think of like, oh, I need to seize the moment right now because I haven't been. And it's like, oh, fuck that. Of course, I've been doing this my entire life. Like, people are like, are you going to do something differently? And it's like, no, I'm going to do even more of it, but not in some exaggerated way because because I can't. But I think the other thing that death actually, and then I'll stop I'll hand it over to you guys, but to think about this, and I think you've witnessed it both with your families and your relationship. The one thing that became so evident from what I ended up experiencing, and also seeing how you behave for others, right? I lost a lot of friends, during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And also doing a lot of work with ACT UP and other things, that the one thing is that you end up, like, what I got to see was, and it sounds really corny, I never ever talk like that, but it's how you're loved and how you love. And I'd like, I think, and also in this moment to bring that into things. So it's evident from both of your work that that's a part of how it's actually done. So anything, I mean, I think it's also, some of these things sound so like saccharine and kind of ill-considered at a time. I guess maybe there's more of it when there's just so much hatred too. I mean,
Yeah.
Michelle, do you know how you want to die?
I think that for the last couple of years, I've been working on a project called the Post-Verbal Social Network, and it looks at, I build a bunch of prototypes of language replacement systems or language disposal systems and new ways of interacting with people that don't centralize language.
Yeah.
And it turns out that a lot of them actually look like, and this was a big surprise for me, dance. Which, I'm sorry,
that's what you do.
Dancer. Dance is like my first language, but I'm always surprised that I actually return to it as like, oh no, that's handy. For one of the post-verbal social network prototypes, I made these L-shaped coffins. They're coffins where you lie on them sideways, and I think they've been converted into bookshelf. There's one that's a bookshelf on the back wall. And my idea is that you would go, so I made two, I made three, and I put casters on the bottom, and you would lie in it sideways, and you'd put one leg over, and you'd put these two L-shaped coffins in a very large room, like a gymnasium. And then you can kick your leg out of the L-shaped coffin and move yourself around. And the idea was, rather than going on a dinner date with anyone that you wanted to, you would rendezvous at a gym, each get in an L-shaped coffin, and then see if you could, over time, run into each other and
it's like demolition derby of caskets.
That's right.
It's kind of like demolition derby of caskets and kind of Tetris. But the moment of getting the two L-shaped coffins to nook was more gratifying and than any conversation I've had. You know what I mean? The physical labor of it. But anyway, so after I
totally wish I could do that with you right now.
I would love to both. I have three. So but the how do I say, so when I made the L-shaped coffin, and then it was in the basement, and then I found sometimes I was getting too much information, and I would go downstairs and just lie in the L-shaped coffin, and it had this kind of Temple Grandin soothing holding capacity. And then I started to think that so much of the work that I just started thinking that perhaps all the work that I've ever made, and when I see anyone else's work, especially definitely both of yours, that all of this art is just death practice, that it's a form of death practice. And so explicitly, truly with your father, but in the demolition and even the prototype 180, and the way you're languaging and how Requiem functions and where the archive is and all of that. And so I feel that the death practice is part of that thing of also, well, I kind of want to build a bridge now to the loving part that you were talking about, Mary Ellen, but I'm afraid to cross that bridge. But I see it.
I see it.
Fear.
I can see it. Yeah. But so I don't have any specifics, although I do intend to live to be 108. That is my plan. Like yeah.
You have
But,
a mission.
so I don't, yeah, I have a lot of ideas. Yeah, I don't know. I want to maybe something, you know what? Maybe I have ideas about what I would want to wear more than anything else. Like, but besides that, not so much. But except that I do practice, and like there's so many things where I'm like, I feel like I keep testing in the work the viability of different scenarios, their stability as they rotate, or they are, as they shift, something like that. So I haven't.
Well, I mean, to go back to your sort of where you started us with body and dance, like I've always thought of the camera work I do as a work of the body, right? And it's a body plus a machine. So, you become a cyborg is not the right word, but you are a camera person, right? These two things go together, and you have to move and spend time and get up and follow or stay and wait, and sort of all of these different activities. And then it becomes really important, like, how much water did I drink? Like, I can't stop filming now because I have to keep going, and so I had experienced that for years as a camera person. But then when we made the film called Camera Person, because I'm not so original, there was this like realization of like, oh, we have to share with the audience that images are body, right? That images don't just come from body, that they are body. And, I always think of images as ongoing relationships, right? They get made in the context of relationships, and then they continue over time as relationships. But so, in the edit room, I was able to sort of shift my position to my body and watch my own body as evidenced in the footage that I had shot. And I sort of didn't know I was in the footage, right? And then it was like, oh, right, I was pregnant when I was shooting that, and I was grieving, my mom was dying, and here I'm running. And so we constructed the film in an order. I think that's one thing that we were talking about earlier, about beginnings and endings, or progression, how things move forward. When you're doing video work, like, you put things in an order, you build an architecture, and part of the building was around, okay, can we share with the audience that my body was there?
Yeah.
How do we share that my body was there? And then what does that change about the way we relate to it? So that was like a thing that we were doing when we were editing. But then this crazy thing happened for me, of this moment where the editor, Nels Bangerter, who I was working with, took the shot of my mom's ashes and put it in front of footage of my mom alive. And because it was footage that I had filmed sort of knowing that she would really not like it, and I really felt like I should keep the footage private, and it was a betrayal of her, I sort of handed it over to him without really looking at it, because I was too afraid of what I was doing. I wasn't giving myself permission to do it. But then when he cut these two things together in that order, I had this like brief moment where I really, for real, thought my mom was alive again. Like, she went from being in the box to being out of the box. And I was like, oh, like, and that sensation, that feeling that in my body, really believing that my mother had come back to life, was part of how I got to this death practice. So for me, it's as much practicing the dying and how do we cope with the dying as it is like getting to sort of generate this pleasurable experience of bringing my dad back to life again.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing it to kill him. I'm doing it to bring him back to life. Of course, in some ways, I'm doing it to kill him too. But that feeling in the body that both of you are talking about, Mary Ellen, I was cracking up because I recently rewatched Jackass, and I was totally connecting Jackass to your piece in the
Thank
car,
you for that
right?
insult. No, I'm just
Right? Because they have that like incredible. There's an incredible demolition derby scene that
Yeah.
opens up Jackass,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
Yeah.
the impulse of Jackass in many ways is
Yeah.
the body is always present. The stakes are here.
Yeah.
And honestly, I find the guys in Jackass to be very loving towards each other.
Yeah.
They like it is a communal like, you know, folly. And it's also about like the anticipatory pain, right? And I think, you know, that's part of what we're talking about here. I mean, in some ways, Mary Ellen, you're like, your work is like trying to recover time or understand how time functions. Like you lost time, but then there's also this like the moving forward trajectory of anticipating things and not even knowing you're anticipating them. Like Michelle, for you didn't realize you were anticipating the absence of your father.
Well, and part of that too, that was a choreography. I mean, the whole thing was to game a game, and that, you know, in doing that, it was choreographed. I mean, and I think that so much of the work, you know, ends up being, and I think about choreography a lot. I mean, Tina Bausch, who I knew and who also, you know, one of the great things I love when she did Palermo.
We're just getting Zoom bombed.
That's
Come on
good.
in. Come on in, Felix.
Yeah.
We're Zoom bombed, but he doesn't want to be on screen. Yeah.
They usually don't. They like to keep it. So.
No, I
don't. But of where that began with, you know, the invitation to go to Palermo, and she was like, no, I can read about it. I can, like, there's enough that I can do to understand what the city is and how I can distill it into like my own, you know, fiction, if you will, or my own reality, my own. So I think that process and how those things get set up, right? I mean, what do you do with it, and how like, how did you decide which ways your father was going to die? Was it the ways that, is there some kind of Alzheimer's expert that you talked to?
No.
That said, like,
no, I mean, honestly, like I had all these fantasies of how I wanted him to die. You know, I wanted to put him on an ice floe. I wanted to catch him on fire. You know, like I've had all these like really big epic ideas about, you know, sort of the things that I would like to do in filmmaking. But then it became very apparent that the dementia created limitations that were so profound. It was like, oh, what can we do? Became the set of questions, right? But it's interesting what you're saying about gaming the game, right? Because I think what we were trying to do together, like there's definitely like an aspect of it was like we're trying to game dementia or trying to game death. But what I know from documentary and being a body with a camera is you always get punked. Like you think you know what's going to happen, you think you know what's coming, and then it's just like out of left field. So what we were trying to set up in the process of making this film was like to stay in the not knowing, which you both referred to as like central to your work, to like keep not knowing. And then what's interesting to me is this use of the word choreography, because now I'm thinking of like editing is a little bit like choreography in a certain way, because it's like trying to figure out what's happening tonally or emotionally. But so we would film a documentary sequence until, you know, something happened, right? Until my father says to me, I'm your little brother now. And I'm just like I never saw that. Like, I never thought my dad was going to say that to me, right? and then I can't focus. But that emotional state that was unpredictable, then moving from that, then we try to imagine the unimaginable, which is how would he die then? Moving out of that. So we used like the sort of evidence of the unexpected to then imagine what we can't imagine. And so it would be this sort of back and forth in the editing process. But I love thinking of it as choreography in a certain way, because it's like emotional choreography, because it's like, it is real for me, like how desperate and how strongly I don't want him to die. But I also really want everyone to laugh and I really want to laugh. So then I'm going to bump up my most earnest self against my most irreverent self. And cinema can help me do that juxtaposition. And then I game my own emotions in some way.
Mhm. Yeah. So the one thing that I was thinking about is too is like, you know, where we all are currently, and that, you know, it is a process of, as my friend Yvonne at Yombo wore, because I always give people credit, it's free to thank people, remember that.
I love that. That is so good.
And you know, she at a conference in Nairobi for Kwani, this journal that she was involved with in the founding, talked about using the ethical imagination. And I think that, you know, forget about the moral imagination. Like we actually, and something that I did, we had somebody make cocktails, and the cocktail version was the ethical imagination. The mocktail version was the moral imagination. You just have to think about that for a little bit. But so where are our ethical imaginations right now? Like what, you know, like look at, we've made work on death and dying and loss. And in the present, I think that it's this, you know, it's this incredibly challenging time that's unearthed so many injustices and inequities. And I watched the Molly Ivins documentary the other night. Those are big Texas boots to fill. But just in, you know, reiterating, you know, what Hannah Arendt has like been over and over, you know, writing about, is that to commit to thinking acts. And so what are our thinking acts and how are they being manifested in our work right now? And you know, I guess to depart from what we've been talking about in the present, but then what's ethically imagined for you both right now? Go ahead.
Take it away.
So I feel like
She'll be like, I'm not an ethical thinker, but.
And if you're not, that's part of it too. Is that it's not a, you know, you can be totally immoral or amoral or yeah.
Well, I feel like your question in the neighborhood you're in right now goes to one of the questions. I made a list of questions to ask you all, some of which are not appropriate, but they were my first impulse. But one of them had to do with, I'm actually just going to look down my list so I can just read it because I don't want to lie.
That's you.
But it said, so what about all of our ancestor worship that's going on in our work and its relationship to racial justice in the US right now? That
Boom.
That's it.
Boom. So good.
Mind. And because of, yep.
Great.
And like.
Very old white man.
Yeah, I had one of those. I'm glad you still have yours. That's
yeah, at least on a stick.
Yep.
I have a picture somewhere. Yeah.
Is your father still living? Is your father still living?
My dad?
Oh no, not yours. I know yours. Oh yeah,
yes.
Mary Ellen's. I know Mary Ellen. I'm sorry, your mother.
No, my father died in 2001, right after 9/11. So he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So he's been gone for a while. But the ancestral worship is also not ancestral worship in my case. I mean, I think that it's part of like utilizing that, and you know, this car that was, you know, a rock around my neck, and in choosing and putting, you know, his ashes in the glove compartment in an Illy coffee can, and crashing it initially into the museum in Germany, is also of like, it's all just material, right? And to treat it as such. And if you infuse it with this, oh, it's my personal, it's my autobiography. I mean, that's why I'm always hesitant to talk about these details of these events that I had personally. because it is material, and how you can use it and what is acceptable or not. And you're the only one that knows, because it's your, you know, it's your bag of materials that you have, right? It's like, and how, like what you pull out, and then you have to then put it out into the world, right? It goes into the kind of vitrine and the work of like, okay, what does this thing look like, and how are people going to react to it? And you can surmise what that might be, but you don't ever really know. You never know what.
Well, and I think that's where now I won't ask anyone to edit in post, but why I shouldn't have read the question, because using the word ancestral worship was actually a Mormon reference to.
Yeah, no,
and so it was
yeah.
but it's like it's the, and when I meant that in terms of inheritance, both material, like you're talking about in terms of the collection of ashes, as well as whatever schools we got to go to, and the white privilege that is facilitated opportunity, but also the not to commodify a psychological phenomena of a certain kind of parent, but like just where, so I wish I hadn't used that word, because I would never want to assume any of that about anyone's work or what their work was, implying. And so like when I made the good dad texting system, I also made a bad dad texting system, like, because there's no assumption, it's just not a reality. And that, so that's what I
feel like it's like a wonderful provocation, and I'm glad that you said it. And I absolutely, deeply struggled with like, why in the world would I make this film now? Like I really struggled with that question. And, I've actually sort of the dilemmas of, sort of the ever never here quest for racial justice has been the focus of my work my entire career. And in some ways, for me, this was a betrayal of myself to make this film, right? To like it felt like, and my dad asked me the question too, is like, why do I get a movie? And I think the why does he get a movie, right? Is because like there are resources, there are years put into this relationship that was able to be, all of those questions I think are really in this film for me. And also I think the ethics, like, what's your question? What's our ethical thinking? What's your question, Mary Ellen? Like, what's our ethical imagination? Our ethical imagination. Yeah. So I would say like, absolutely, my life has been consumed. I was brought up Seventh-day Adventist, and it was definitely, I was like, a moral imagination was imposed upon me, which was a pretty hermetic, strong concept. And Michelle, we've talked about the fact that you were raised Mormon, like to overthrow a moral imagination that has been imposed on you is a kind of a Herculean work, because I think it structures your very brain. And when all of your ancestors have been nice to you on top of it, it becomes challenging to like overthrow that imagination. And, there's no question in my mind that you see in which these systems of moral imagination interlock with systems of oppression, and go sort of hand in glove in all kinds of ways that you then try to like sort of unextricate, but then you find yourself extricated in other systems of capitalism, or your own, the sort of the creation of you as a thing. And so, for me, I feel like where my ethical imagination is, Mary Ellen, is like, I've spent many, many years involved in social justice documentaries. And I believe that the form is must be pushed because the form, when it is reductive, when it portrays humans as one thing or another thing, that it is limited.
Mhm.
And what I'm interested in is how do we express in languages that we invent our particular take on the world in our historical context.
Mhm.
And what does it take to express that? That's like this impossible struggle, right? Michelle, you're like, I have an impossible struggle with language, and in some ways, like, I have an impossible struggle with sound and music. Like, it's so foreign to me. And yet I wish to speak in that language, right? So they sort of ever evolving quest to find the language to express what we see, and also to see others. So Mary Ellen, your great line of like, it's free, thank people. That was a part of this process with the making of this film, was like, I want to see everyone. I want to see all of the team. I want to see my father. And how can we not know what's going to happen with this movie, but be respectful by seeing everyone who's a part of this process? That was my ethical imagination.
And that
To
was
not-
evident. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was evident. And I mean, that's one thing I really appreciated. And Michelle, the ancestral, I love. I mean, it was in the questioning of it is just to point out of like, how do you, in your own mind, right, when you're conceptualize something of like, you're utilizing this material, right? That's your dead father and his ashes, and you're crashing a car. So my name is Kirsten Welker, and I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. It seems evident where the country is actually moving, but do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make, and in some future collaboration on this project of using the ethical imagination? I think we can have the choreography and the filming and put something together. And I'm serious about this. There's no metaphor involved, or it's true. It's only truth. So on that note, I don't know where we are with time.
I think we've done it.
Yeah.
I think we've done it.